Hi, I'm Eric Benfeld with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia Tech, and I'm for the soil, both for my children and future generations, viable agriculture, local waterways, and the protection of natural resources. Thank you for being part of this conversation and the For the Soil podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of For the Soil, a Conversation. I'm Jeff Ishii. Today, we feature a unique operation located near Chesterfield, Virginia. It's called Broadfork Farm. It's owned by Janet Aardema and Dan Gagnon, and I think you'll agree after listening to this episode, they've got a lot going on at Broadfork Farm. Our host for this episode, Eric Benfeld with Virginia Cooperative Extension, and Mary Sketch Bryant with Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Let's now go to the show.
We are so excited to have Janet Aardema and her daughter Sylvie on with us today. Janet and her husband Dan run Broadfork Farm in Chesterfield, Virginia, where they produce certified naturally grown vegetables and organic, naturally leavened, hearth-baked bread. Janet and Dan both have a background in biology and put it to use on the farm with just some amazing practices for soil health and incredible land stewardship practices. So we're excited to have you here, Sylvie and Janet. Welcome. And I guess just to start, would love to hear some about why soil health is important to you and what you're doing at Broadfork Farm to manage for healthy soils.
Sure. So we see soil health as of course everyone in this group and everyone championing this effort see soil health as this amazing foundation for us all the organisms living here on the earth. And so soil has the ability to grow amazingly healthy, nutritious food to nourish and fuel us humans. And it also has this amazing ability to sustain all life and hold on to water and be home to, both microorganisms as well as quite literally the foundation of forests and on and on and on. So we are admittedly, soil and farm nerds, but soil is amazing as the foundation of that. So putting a focus on healthy soil is quite literally the way that we can create and have created a base for our business which is our farm.
Well, Janet and Sylvie, we've been promoting the idea of, we can all be for soil, and then our colleagues with USDA Natural Resource Conservation Services, they've really been promoting four principles, keeping the soil covered, minimizing disturbance, maximizing living roots throughout the year, and energizing with diversity. And I was reading a little bit more about teens for acting for carbon capture, and just reminds me how much of these principles really revolves around carbon, both carbon capture and preventing loss and trying to increase that. So really looking forward to hearing more about that initiative and both what you're doing on the farm as well as trying to educate more people about that, Sylvie.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, Sylvie, you just got a huge international award, correct?
So I became a finalist for a scholarship to go to a private school in Indonesia. They picked someone else for the scholarship itself, which is just a 1-year fully paid admission to their school. But I did become a finalist, 15 total people from around the world. And I was the only one from the US, which is very interesting. And I apparently am getting a certification, but I'm not 100% sure on the details of that. Right, to recognize you as one of the finalists, and the award is called the Young Green Leaders Award. Yeah, so focusing on teens around the world who were focusing on something that could make our planet better, whether that was through education, something to help with the climate crisis, with climate change, or any any project that would somehow better our world.
So I'd love to hear a little bit about what the project entails and how you are sharing with youth the connection between carbon, our land, and how we steward it, and climate change.
Yeah, so I'm working through social media and workshops on instructing and teaching people how they can keep their soil covered in their backyards, how they can grow more of their own food with these principles in mind, which you usually don't think of them as something that can connects carbon capture and other farming practices. But if you keep sorry, I feel like I'm rambling here, but my project uses teens moves to educate teens and adults on how they can use the soil and in their backyards to capture more carbon, and how they can lower their carbon footprint through buying more sustainably, putting more organic matter in the soil, so composting more of their food scraps and decreasing their waste. And that's pretty much some of the main goals.
Amazing. And how has your growing up on Broadfork Farm and having that experience in sustainable agriculture influenced your work with the project?
I think it gave me a great head start to be passionate about food and passionate about the environment, as well as getting a really fundamental understanding of the soil, its importance, and the impact it has on our world, how we need it to live, and how every living being on Earth needs it to live. And I think that from being raised on this farm from a very early age, those values and ideas have become very important to me through that.
So Sylvie and our other children as well, but Sylvie is our oldest, has grown up very much in the fields of our farm and constantly hearing us talk about, as well as seeing us implement these things that are so important to us. So we are now almost entirely a no-till farm. We weren't able to be that way at first when we started off with this land that was extremely hard and had very little organic matter and so on and so on and so forth. But our kids see these practices day in and day out of us doing our very best to carry out these 4 principles. We're keeping the soil covered, we're mulching, we are using living mulch, we are using straw mulch, we are using all sorts of types of mulch, but they constantly hear and know that we're saying that's important. We are not tilling, and they're hearing us talk about why we're not tilling. We are trying to have living roots in our fields at all times and have a very, very short turnover time between crops in order to have it be no time at all. We'll turn over crops within on the same day in order to have living roots in all of our growing areas all the time. And to hear us talk about diversity as this extremely integral part of our farm. We very much foster the diversity within the soil, as well as grow 50 different crops every year. So it's an interesting context, admittedly, for a child to be growing up in and have this talk and these practices be literally part of their daily life. And so that's the context for Sylvie. And so when she found out about this competition for the Young Green Leaders Award last summer, and she just started brainstorming, we just started asking her, well, what's important to you? What are you really passionate about? What do you really care about? And where do you see a niche that you could help fill? And so this is what she came up with.
Yeah, that's the other aspect that we're trying to emphasize. That so often it really is an expression of our values and who we are as people. And Sylvie, I know you mentioned social media, that you've been writing about mulching and composting, and I think you recently wrote about permaculture. Can you talk about that in relationship to carbon capture?
Yeah. So permaculture, I think of as really maximizing living roots. So
the difference between permaculture and a more traditional form of farming is that permaculture uses mostly perennial plants, and perennial plants have much larger root systems, and their root biomass is much larger. So they have many more roots, and they're in the soil for more than just one season, as annual plants are. And so this does really great. This makes it really, really good at capturing the carbon, because the roots have such an important role in bringing that carbon through the plant and then into the soil again. And so when there's more roots, they do a better job of keeping them into the soil, or bringing it into the soil and keeping it there, as well as keeping the soil covered and keeping the soil together.
So yeah, I saw that one of your recent workshops was on forest farms. I hadn't heard, what is a forest farm?
Yeah, so for a forest farm, or a food forest, as some people call it, basically is recreating a regular forest with food producing plants. So when we think of carbon sinks, we usually think of a forest aspect. So an old growth forest, a bamboo forest, those are common carbon sinks that we have on Earth. And so what you're trying to do is create or mimic a regular forest with food producing plants. So fruit trees can be some of that, like overstory, so very tall trees. And then you can have, when you plant smaller bushy trees, and then you have your ground cover. And those are kind of the three main aspects of a food forest to really mimic those three layers that are in a normal forest.
And then Sylvie, when you talk to your friends, I know for myself, my dad grew up on a dairy farm, but then we're really almost 2 generations removed from farming or food production. When you're talking with your friends and classmates, how do you get them enthusiastic about carbon capture?
I think that it's difficult to find that group of teens that would be really, really excited about it. And a lot of teens I meet, a lot of my classmates, they are just really enthusiastic about climate activism, and they know that they want to do something to help the climate, and they just didn't know what to do before. And so I go to them and I'm like, hey, you really want to do something to help the climate? I have a solution for you. And that's kind of my sales pitch to them. I'm like, hey, I can teach you how to plant these trees in your backyard and help you compost and help you reduce your waste and your trash, and help you have a smaller carbon footprint. And if and not everyone's interested in that, and that's that's okay. That's just the reality of life. But that's just what I tried to tell them, and find people that are interested in that.
It's a really great parallel that I've been reflecting on. Our state launching this soil health program, and you all launching this podcast, and your audience is admittedly mostly adults, just trying to get the word out there and educate adults who, in our times, most adults are probably not thinking about the soil in their daily life. And Sylvie just saw that amongst her peer group. She was like, teenagers aren't really, this generation is growing up in a time in which they're hearing about climate change all the time. But Sylvie said, I don't think my friends actually know much about the science behind photosynthesis and carbon and climate change. Like, I don't think most of my peers know how all of those things are linked. And they also, I don't think they know how to act on what they might want to act on. So I'm really impressed and love that she saw that niche, and I see these wonderful parallels between her project and what the Soil Health Coalition and For the Soil is doing.
Yeah, and I think my mom just pointed out some of my main points. But I didn't have people a lot of my peers, they were thinking of climate change and the solution as big machinery, all fossil fuels. They weren't thinking about how the natural system that's been happening for our millions of years is already here. And it just needs to stop being so disruptive or disrupted. Sorry, and to just have space to do this natural cycle. And so my goal is to tell them about that. It's not that they don't want to hear about it. It's just I haven't had the chance, or they don't know people who know about that. That's I'm just trying to spread the word, and so that they know that that's even an option.
And you're trying to give people the opportunity to get their hands in the soil with you, to sort of make it be more accessible, and then hopefully they leave inspired to engage with the soil and planting plants after being at one of your workshops, right?
Yeah.
And Sylvie, would you want to talk a little bit more about composting? I know personally, I think, we often waste or don't utilize all the food that we buy. And, so one is, how do we plan well or better so we're not wasting food? But then, when we do have food scraps or vegetable scraps, that can be a source for building the soil. And can you talk about that and some of the workshops that you've had?
Yeah. I think that composting is so much more important than people think it is. It's more than just throwing away your food scraps and putting in your backyard. It has so many important aspects. You're returning this carbon to the soil where it belongs. You pick it. It's a cycle. You pick it, it grows. You pick it, and then you either eat it, or you compost the scraps and it returns to the earth again. And so you're just, you're aiding in that cycle. And so food scraps can be extremely beneficial. And number one, you can make your own fertilizer in your backyard. But also, when you're composting and keeping these food scraps out of the landfill, you are doing so much. Food scraps in landfills do really, they do a lot of harm to the amount of methane in our atmosphere. So when they are breaking down, when they're surrounded by plastics, they break down much quicker, and so it creates pockets. Yeah, it creates pockets of just methane in these landfills, which number one creates just like space. Which is destructive in the landfills, but it also then just releases this concentrated methane because there's no oxygen, there's no interaction with oxygen, the interaction with oxygen isn't enough. So when you're composting, you're making free fertilizer, but you're also decreasing the amount of methane in our atmosphere when it's naturally composting the way it should be and decomposing the way it should be.
And that was a recent conversation between Eric Benfelt with Virginia Cooperative Extension, Mary Sketch Bryant with the Virginia Soil Health Coalition, and the fine folks at Broadfork Farm in Chesterfield, Virginia. More information about their operation at the website broadforkfarm.net. For the Soil Conversation is made possible with funding support from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and the Agua Fund. Other partners include the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, Virginia Cooperative Extension, Virginia State University, Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, and partners of the Virginia Soil Health Coalition. Views expressed on this podcast are those of each individual guest. To download a copy of this or any other episode, visit the website forthesoil.org, and if you have a specific question about soil health, contact your local extension office, your local USDA service center, or a soil and water conservation district office. Music used during today's program was provided courtesy of the Flip Charts. All rights reserved. For the Soil, a conversation is produced by On the Farm Radio in collaboration with Virginia Tech. I'm your host, Jeff Ishii.